Hi folks, you're with Tassus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about voting patterns, and I'll use the presidential election in the United States as an example, or you could really apply this to any Western country or any country where there's universal access to the franchise for people 18 and over. Now I've looked at various videos, and there's quite a bit of online stuff. I haven't verified the accuracy, but I've got no reason to doubt it. What would the voting outcomes look like if, say, only men were to vote? Then, and again, using the last US presidential election, so if only men voted, Trump would have won every state. Even places like California and New York would have won every state, and some of them would have been, sort of huge, 90% plus, if only men voted. If only women voted, the reverse would be the case. Democrats would win everywhere. Kamala Harris would have won everywhere. Now, there are also other things, like if only people over the age of 23 or 25 voted, again, the Trump would have won handsomely in a runaway, absolute landslide. If people over the age of 25 years voted, again, Trump would have won like 48, 49 states, and so on. So if people say 16 and over, this is assuming you get a large turnout of that age group. If people 16 went to vote, then again, you would have the position of the Republicans would be impossible. The Democrats would win in a landslide of 16-year-olds are voting. There was another one that, though, took me a little bit by surprise, although I hadn't really thought about it, was in-person voting. That is, people turning up to the election office to physically cast their vote in person, as against people putting in their postal votes or absentee votes or whatever they're called. And in-person voting, again, Trump would have won all 50 states. If it was only mail-in voting, then the Democrats would have won 47 of the states. So there's an interesting sort of difference here or divide, and I don't know how it can be bridged. So we need to maybe just go back a little bit. But universal franchise for men and women has only been around for about 100 years. So it's in the overall history or historical context of voting and government selecting, that sort of thing, it's only been 100 years. So it's quite a new experiment, if you like, and a new set of conditions. And I think the ramifications of this, the universal franchise for men and women, are still playing out. And we don't really know where it's going to go. I don't think we've heard the end of it. I think this is part of an evolutionary process, and it would be difficult to say that it was working well. But before that, universal franchise, even for men, was fairly recent as well. That's been around for not much more than 100 years. And the if you like, the impetus for universal franchise was war. On one side, you've got men who are laying their lives down for the country who don't have to vote. And so this was seen as an anomaly. If you're going to die on behalf of your fellow citizens and protect your country, then shouldn't you have a right to have some sort of a say in governmental affairs? Well, yes, is my view. I think that's a wholly reasonable position to take. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. The next thing to consider, and I think this is an important aspect, is um, soldiers are conscripted at the age of 18, but the vote was only for the initially at 20, you had to be 23 and over, then it was 21, and then it became 18. And I'm using a combination here. This could be, say, the developments of the franchise, the right to vote in, say, Britain, the United States, and so on. So, and they moved at slightly different times. For example, in New Zealand, they gave the vote to women early, because if they didn't, then just white men only would have been outnumbered by the Maoris, and they wanted to make sure there's a white majority. So they extended the vote to women only, really for that reason at the time. Today they tout it as a great feminist move, but it wasn't. But on the on the issue of voting for 18-year-olds, this came up particularly during the drama around the Vietnam War in the United States, and also other countries where that were involved in the Vietnam War. Australia was included. And again, the question came up: if you're going to lay your life down for your country, then shouldn't you have the right to vote? And again, I agree, you should. Anyone that's called up or is under threat to be called up for military service, I don't mean working in an office, in the background. So I mean, where you're out front getting shot at, then you should have, I believe, the right to vote. So we've seen extensions to voting. Men who are going to lay their lives down, mothers who are going to give up their sons and their husbands, you should have a right to vote. So, or women who have been drafted into, say, behind the lines military service, manufacturing munitions, for example. So the modern franchise came out of that. Really around 1880, sort of around that time, the idea of voting had stalled to say, well, it should incorporate more than 50 to 60% of adult men over the age of 23 or over, and around 10% of women, give or take. I mean, these numbers aren't exact, but in that area. So it had stalled around that. Those are the people that had the maximum skin in the game, if you like, of the society, or wealth, depending on your point of view there. And remember, a lot of the elite wealthy class died in, say, World War One, because the captains and the lieutenants all came from noble families, if you like, and use that term. They had to be at the front of the charge as they charged into the machine guns. So they had heavy casualties among them. So this is where universal franchise came from. It was born from modern mass warfare, where all the resources of the nation are mobilised for war, and only an industrial war could have that. And there had never been an industrial war, or not on a mass scale at least. The last sort of major conflagration that involved multiple parties at the same time was the Napoleonic Wars, and that was in the very, very early stages of the Industrial Revolution. So there was no chance of a mass industrial war at that time. There were no railways, for example, back then. So we need to understand that's how the franchise developed. Now, when the vote was given to 18-year-olds at that time, certainly in Australia anyway, typically there was a very small number of people went to university. So, and merit was a large determinant, not the sole, but very much a primary determinant on, who graduated from high school, who went to, how many people go to university. 2 or 3% of kids that stayed at high school went to university, as opposed to today where, depending on which country you're in, it's anywhere between 40 and 60%. So there are masses of kids going to school today who would have flunked out of high school at age 14 or 15 back in the day. So when the voting was given, there was the affirmative action, diversity, equity, and inclusion didn't exist. So the idea of merit, still deciding who would sit as a member of parliament, who would get into university, who the professors would be, who the lecturers would be. There was still a lot of quality control around merit. That's all disappeared now. So in today, the rest of society has moved in different directions. So the idea of 40, 50, 60% of kids going to university back in the 1960s was unthinkable. You'd have been laughed out of the room if you'd suggested it. But the idea that somebody with an 80 IQ would be gifted a junior, high school diploma, a senior high school graduation to a good, one of the top tier universities. That just wasn't even on the radar back at the time, other than the most radical fringe elements. So this is the society we live in now has completely changed. Merit has gone, affirmative action reigns supreme, or hopefully with the incoming administration of President Trump, that'll start to unwind. But that's the situation. So the idea of someone like Ocasio-Cortez or Mazie Hirono in the United States, the idea of somebody that dumb getting into the Congress, the House of Representatives of the United States, the idea of somebody that dumb and that stupid getting in also is unthinkable. So we've had many changes, affirmative action among them, but also the race hustling and all that sort of stuff. So the electorate that we see today reflects an affirmative action mindset, where people living in the richest, most privileged, safest country in the world can still run around claiming that they're oppressed and they need even more handouts and giveaways. But again, it comes down to, and if you look at the interviews on the street at colleges, and women get asked, younger women, college students get asked, well, is it a bad thing that there's the Trump administration? Oh, women have no rights. All our rights will be taken away. We'll have no rights. Oh, what rights will be taken away? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. What are you asking me for? Well, you just said your rights are going to be taken away. You said rights will be taken. What rights will be taken? Oh, I don't know. And so, that people that stupid would have never made it to university years ago during times of merit. But now we have a completely different landscape. And I think that landscape has substantially undermined the purpose, the structure, the relevance, and the integrity, the sanctity of the electoral process. And so the question would be, do we need to go back to the drawing board to revisit this? What is electioning? What is the electoral process? The right to vote, all these sorts of things need to be rethought out, because no one envisaged a society that would not be meritorious. And we now have such a society which is not based on merit, which is based on affirmative action and DEI and so on. No one envisaged the mass migration from the third world. These were things that weren't even considered back then, but they've substantially undermined and I would say savagely, brutally compromised the integrity of the democratic process and the understanding of the purpose of democracy and its relevance to the administration of a nation state. So these are going back to the drawing board, I think, is vital. Now, that's one side, but on the other side, no one had envisaged or imagined that it was even conceivable that an outside group would control what was hitherto a sovereign government. Remember, 100 years ago, not only was the British government sovereign, but they were amongst the heaviest hitters in the world. They were the big time dudes, and now the British government is nothing more than a bunch of fetch and carry flunkies and stooges working for the globalists. They're told your budget for your KPI for mass migration of black peasants is X, and you will do it, and off they scurry around like little children doing what they're told. I mean, it's insane. No one envisaged that, and because of these other changes, that being primary among them, and the concept, the very idea that the sovereign nation state doesn't exist, then and you have bodies like the EU or Davos and these sort of things that can act arbitrarily and without any accountability. These are things that need to be considered when we view the what democracy means, what voting means, what elections mean, and so on. And you look at say, the election of Donald Trump, President Trump, recently, assuming the numbers can even be believed. If you look at the way the 2020 presidential election was corrupted and undermined, and the integrity just shot to pieces, then it shows you the power that the deep state globalists have to make sure elections are jigged and rigged in the way they want them. But they couldn't really get away with it as fully as they'd have liked in the last election. But if you consider that President Trump supposedly only won by a couple of million votes, that shows you what a close run thing it was. And now I believe there was serious issues of voter stacking for Kamala there. I'm almost convinced that millions of votes, fake votes, false votes, were recorded for Kamala. But nonetheless, I mean, regardless whether they were or weren't, Trump only won by really what was a couple of million votes in the overall scheme of things. That was a close run thing. So it illustrates, and coming back again to the point made in the thing, if only women voted, Trump would have lost by a large margin. If only men voted, he would have won in a crushing landslide. And that seems to be a problem to me. And when women on the street are interviewed, college kids, whatever, he's going to take away our rights. What rights? I don't know. Well, he's not going to. Where have you heard that? I don't know. I heard it somewhere. This sort of thing. Now, those low information voters, again, weren't envisaged around such peripheral boutique issues. Voting was going to be on men with families. Are there going to be jobs there? Is the economy going to be doing well? Am I going to be called up and for military service? There were a much smaller array of things. Now there are many things that people are tantalised with, voters are tantalised, many of which are boutique sort of issues for women and so on. Are we offering equity and equality to black trans lesbians and things like that, things that again would never have existed years ago, and these are diluting the vote that focuses on the real issues, such as the state of the economy and so on, cost of living, that sort of stuff. Not that those things have become irrelevant, but there's now much more background noise and haze that's in the political process. And again, that means are the voters that we have, that are easily swayed by those boutique issues, are they the sort of people you want to have voting? Should voting be restricted? If so, how? And so on. So I think the time to go back to the drawing board is now, and to revisit it, not to limit people's option of opportunity to participate in the democratic process. That should always stay, but it should be relative to skin in the game. Or should it be? That's a question maybe that's on the table. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.